Since September 1944, the war had dragged on far longer than anyone had hoped. Europe was a battlefield of broken buildings, burning fields, and exhausted soldiers. On this chilly September morning, in a muddy patch of the Netherlands near a town called Best, an American Sherman tank crew sat waiting for orders. The tension in the air was thick. Everyone knew the Germans were close, and not just infantry. Panzers, deadly, heavy, near-indestructible German tanks. Corporal Joe Bennett was the loader in one of those Shermans. 23 years old, with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, Joe wasn't anyone special. Just another Midwest farm boy tossed into the madness of Europe. His job was simple: load the shells, stay alive. But today, something odd was taped near his station inside the tank. A small, cracked shaving mirror. It had started as a joke. A few nights earlier, Joe had found the mirror in a blown-up house and kept it in his kit. He had no use for it. Shaving wasn't a priority when death could knock any second. Out of boredom, he'd taped it just inside the turret, angling it toward the breach so he could watch the gunner and commander without turning his head. But what started as a joke quickly turned into a strange kind of genius. That morning, German Panzers opened fire first. Their shells roared through the air like demons screaming. The Shermans moved, but they were outgunned, out-armored, and outclassed. Normally, in these moments, the crew inside a Sherman would be shouting, the commander spotting, the gunner aiming, the loader scrambling to get the right round into the gun. Seconds were everything, and usually they didn't have enough of them, but inside their Sherman, something was different. Joe didn't wait for the command anymore. Thanks to the mirror, he could see the gunner's hand move toward the trigger. He could see the type of target they were tracking. He didn't have to ask. He didn't have to guess. He just knew. The moment the gun fired, Joe had the next shell ready, sometimes even before the command came. It was like magic, like they were dancing inside a death machine. "Loaded!" he'd yell before the commander even finished his sentence. The gun roared. One German tank exploded, then another. Their Sherman wasn't just surviving, it was killing. After 20 minutes, the Germans pulled back. 3 Panzers destroyed. Not a scratch on Joe's Sherman. The tank commander, Lieutenant Harris, looked at Joe after the battle with disbelief. "What the hell did you do back there, Bennett?" Joe just pointed at the mirror and grinned. "Guess I finally found a use for shaving." At first, no one believed it. A mirror? Seriously? But over the next few days, other crews noticed. Joe's tank was firing faster, reloading smoother, killing harder. Word spread like wildfire. They called it the stupid mirror trick. Tank crews began scrounging for mirrors in bombed houses, wrecked cars, dead soldiers' pockets, anything that could reflect. It was dumb. It was ridiculous. But it worked. Crews that used the mirror started cutting down reload times, hitting faster, staying alive longer. One silly farm boy's prank had given the Shermans an edge. Just enough of one to fight back against the dreaded German steel beasts. No one wrote it in any manual. No general ever mentioned it in speeches. But among the tank crews of the 3rd Armored Division, that cracked little mirror was legend. And Joe, he never called himself a hero. He just kept loading, watching, and waiting. His mirror always taped right above his shoulder. After the fight near Best, Joe's tank, officially known as Echo 7, was given a quiet afternoon to refuel and resupply. The crew sat beside the tank, smoking, eating cold rations, and trying to calm the thunder still ringing in their ears. Lieutenant Harris paced quietly, glancing toward Joe every so often like he was trying to make sense of something impossible. It wasn't long before the officers caught wind of what had happened. A mirror trick? That sounded like nonsense, or worse, a lucky fluke. But luck didn't destroy 3 Panzers in one skirmish. A supply sergeant came snooping around that evening, asking too many questions and pretending to act casual. "So, this mirror thing, "You guys serious?" he asked, looking at Joe like he was expecting a joke. Joe, still chewing on a dry biscuit, just nodded and said, "Serious enough to be alive." Within 2 days, a captain from Division HQ visited their crew personally. He wasn't interested in praise or stories. He wanted to see it. The tank, the mirror, the so-called trick. Joe brought him inside the cramped Sherman turret, pointed to the duct-taped mirror, and explained how it helped him anticipate movements without needing verbal cues. The captain frowned, unimpressed. "That's it?" he scoffed. "You mean to tell me this little piece of glass turned your tank into a killer?" Joe's face stayed calm, but his voice turned sharp. "No, sir. We turned it into a killer. The mirror just helped us act like one brain instead of 4 mouths yelling in a coffin." The captain didn't say much after that. But 3 days later, an unofficial memo started spreading. No seal, no signature, instructing tank crews to improvise with reflective tools for enhanced turret awareness. It didn't mention Joe's name, of course, but every tank crew knew where it came from. That night, as rain began to fall and the crew huddled inside the tank to sleep, Joe found something strange in his ammo box. A brand new square mirror. Clean, untouched. Still in its packaging. "No note, just there," he smirked. "Guess I'm officially stupid now." "About time they caught on," muttered Donnie, the gunner, already half asleep. But war doesn't wait for genius to be rewarded. A week later, Echo 7 was part of a push toward the Siegfried Line. The terrain was brutal. Forests, hills, hidden anti-tank guns, ambushes. The Shermans were advancing blind, and the Germans knew every inch of the terrain. On the second day of the assault, Echo 7's column was moving through a narrow valley when the lead tank exploded in a fireball. A German 88mm gun had fired from a hidden position on the ridge. The whole line froze. Panic set in. Tanks began reversing blindly, some turning sideways in the mud. The radio was chaos, screams, static, conflicting orders. Another Sherman took a hit. Fire and metal scattered everywhere. Inside Echo 7, Harris barked, "We need to move! Find that gun!" But the trees blocked vision. Smoke filled the valley. Joe stared into the mirror, heart pounding, and suddenly he saw it. A quick flash of muzzle smoke, up on the left ridge, hidden behind brush. It was pure luck he caught it. But luck only mattered if you acted fast. "There!" Joe shouted, already slamming a shell into the breach. "High explosive, 2 o'clock high, just past the rocks." Donnie didn't even question him. He swiveled the turret, aimed by instinct. "Fire!" Harris barked. The cannon roared. A second later, the ridge lit up in flames. The 80mm gun was gone. Cheers erupted on the radio. Echo 7 rolled forward while the rest of the column followed behind, cautiously, like they were suddenly protected by something more than armor. By some kind of force that just knew how to survive. But inside the Sherman, no one felt invincible. Joe's hands were trembling, not from fear, but from knowing that if he'd blinked, if the mirror had been crooked, if Donnie had hesitated, they'd all be burning wreckage. The mirror was just glass, but what it gave them was something no manual or officer ever could. Trust. Reflex. Unity. That day, the crew didn't say much. They didn't have to. Echo 7 rolled on toward the next town, the next ridge, the next German gun. And Joe? He reached up, adjusted the mirror slightly, and whispered to it like it was alive. "Let's keep being stupid, huh?" The next morning, frost clung to the ground like death that refused to leave. Echo 7 was parked outside a ruined farmhouse near the town of Stolberg, just beyond the Siegfried Line. Smoke drifted lazily through shattered chimneys, and the only sound in the air was the soft groan of tank engines coming to life. Inside the Sherman, the crew sat quietly. Something had changed since the valley ambush. Joe's mirror trick had already become legend among their company. Other tankers were copying it, taping mirrors in odd corners, calling it the Sherman Eye. But Echo 7's crew wasn't feeling proud. They were feeling hunted. Lieutenant Harris received new intel from command that morning. German Panthers were operating nearby. Faster, deadlier tanks than the Panzers. One of them, a beast nicknamed Black Wolf by Allied scouts, had knocked out 6 Shermans in 3 days. The reports said it was crewed by veterans, cold, precise killers who left no survivors. Harris looked grim as he spread the map over the tank's hood. "They want us to draw it out," he said. "We're bait." The crew fell silent. "You're joking," Donnie said, looking up from his ammo checks. "Us against that?" Joe just stared at the map. "That's suicide." But Harris shook his head. "They think we have the best chance." "Because of your trick, Bennett." Joe didn't respond. He didn't like the way everyone said trick, like it was magic. It wasn't. It was just seeing better, reacting faster, trusting each other. But now it felt like that small edge had painted a target on their backs. They rolled out an hour later. The roads were narrow, half frozen, and full of craters. The forest closed in on both sides, thick and dark. The crew didn't talk much. Every minute felt like the last one. Joe kept his eyes locked on the mirror, nerves twitching with every flicker of light or movement in the shadows. By noon, they reached the clearing where the trap was supposed to be set. A few burned-out Shermans were placed as decoys. Infantry had been pulled back. Echo 7 was the only real tank waiting. "Now we wait," Harris said, checking his watch. Wolf usually hunts in daylight. 2 hours passed. The sun started to fall, turning the trees blood orange. The silence was unbearable. Then it came. A crunch, a movement at the tree line. Joe saw it first, not with his eyes, but in the mirror. A reflection. A dark shape sliding low behind a ridge. The glint of metal. The thin line of a gun barrel moving like a snake. "There!" Joe shouted. "Black Wolf! Left ridge, under the trees!" Donnie didn't wait. He swung the turret hard. The commander screamed coordinates. Joe shoved a shell into the breach so fast his knuckles bled. The German Panther opened fire first. The round missed Echo 7 by inches. Dirt exploded around them, but Echo 7 fired back. Direct hit. The Panther's side armor sparked and cracked. But it didn't go down. "Again!" Harris barked. Joe reloaded. The mirror showed the Panther turning, repositioning. They were trying to flank. Another shell into the breach. Another thunderous shot. The Panther vanished in smoke. But it wasn't over. From behind them, another shell slammed into the earth. "A second Panther? Ambush!" Donnie shouted. "They sent 2!" Joe twisted, staring into the mirror. Smoke, trees, flames. Then, movement. A second barrel. No time for orders. He loaded the next round blind. 2 o'clock! Reverse turret! Donnie reacted instantly. The Sherman turned, fired, explosion. Direct hit. The second Panther didn't move again. For a full minute, Echo 7 sat frozen, surrounded by smoke, dirt, and metal wreckage. Then, silence. They'd done it. 2 Panthers down. They weren't bait. They were wolves, too. That night, when the engineers came to refuel the tank, one of them knocked on the hatch and said with a grin, "Heard the stupid mirror made fools of the Germans again." Joe didn't answer. He was busy cleaning the glass. It had cracked in the blast. Just a thin line, like a scar. He smiled. Still sees better than command. The mirror, now half broken, reflected Joe's face back at him. Tired, dirty, alive. And somehow, still ready for the next fight. The next morning was eerily quiet. Too quiet for comfort. Smoke still curled from the blackened shells of the 2 Panthers Echo 7 had taken out. Like ghosts unwilling to leave. But the real chill wasn't in the air. It was in the crew's nerves. Word of the ambush had spread fast, faster than anyone expected. Joe's mirror trick wasn't just a joke anymore. Higher command wanted reports. Journalists were snooping around, asking about the American tank that destroyed the Wolf. One British colonel even offered Harris cigars and asked if they'd trained with mirrors back in the States. Joe didn't care about any of that. He cared about what Harris said next. "They're reassigning us to lead the next push into Eschweiler," Harris told the crew, pacing in front of the tank. "German armor's been thick there. They want Echo 7 to be point." The crew groaned. Point meant being first. First to see the enemy. First to take the hit. "You sure they want us?" Joe asked. "Or just my mirror?" Harris didn't answer, but that was the answer. They rolled out before dawn. The roads were a mix of frozen mud and corpses, some German, some American. No one looked at them anymore. You just drove around. As the first rays of sunlight hit the horizon, Echo 7 entered the outskirts of Eschweiler. It was a ghost town. Bombed-out buildings leaned against each other like drunk skeletons. The streets were empty, but everyone knew that didn't mean safe. The Germans had mastered the art of hiding in silence. Joe sat hunched in his spot, the mirror tilted just right. He could see Donnie's hands, the barrel angle, and Harris's subtle head turns. Every flicker of movement in the mirror was a possible threat. He didn't blink much anymore. They turned a corner, and that's when all hell broke loose. A shell slammed into the ground just feet ahead of them, throwing dirt and metal into the air. The tank rocked, tracks screaming as Donnie reversed instinctively. "Anti-tank gun! 2 o'clock!" Harris shouted. Joe didn't wait. He had already shoved a shell in. "Fire!" The gun roared. The street lit up. Direct hit. The anti-tank crew never saw it coming. But the celebration was short. Machine gun fire raked across their left flank. Another Sherman behind them caught fire. "Snipers and infantry! Second floor! Red building!" Donnie yelled. Harris barked orders to supporting troops. The radio exploded with noise. Joe loaded another HE shell and looked into the mirror. And that's when he froze. There was a reflection. One that didn't make sense. It wasn't behind them. It wasn't on the street. It was above. He looked again. A rooftop. The top of a building to their left. A German soldier pulling a tarp off something long, black, and lethal. "Roof! Roof!" Joe screamed. "They've got a POC gun on the roof." It made no sense. Anti-tank guns didn't go up high. But desperate Germans did desperate things. Donnie didn't argue. He swung the turret up, even as debris rained from the collapsing buildings. Joe loaded, hands numb, teeth clenched. The second the shell slid in, Donnie fired. The rooftop exploded, gun and gunner thrown into the sky like toys. For a second, there was quiet again. Then Harris said something Joe never forgot. "You saw that. In the mirror?" Joe nodded, breathing hard. It caught the sky behind Donnie's arm, just barely. The lieutenant looked at him like he wasn't real. They called in air support after that. Echo 7 held the street, picking off snipers and machine gun nests with terrifying precision. Every move, every angle. Joe saw it first. Through a cracked, dirty, war-stained shaving mirror. By nightfall, Eschweiler was in Allied hands. That evening, a war correspondent arrived. A tall guy with a camera, a notebook, and a British accent thicker than ration stew. He wanted to write about the mirror gunner, the kid who could spot death in reflections. Joe refused to talk. "Write about the crew," he said, "not the glass." But the journalist smiled and said, "You don't get it. It's not about the mirror. It's about what you do with it." He snapped a photo of Echo 7 as the sun dipped behind the ruins. In it, Joe sat half out of the turret, hand resting on the glass. Behind him, his crew, the Sherman, smoke, victory. And in the mirror's reflection, if you looked close enough, you could still see a war that wasn't over yet. 3 nights later, the mirror cracked completely. It happened during a sudden artillery barrage near a rail yard outside Düren. Echo 7 had been parked, quiet, half the crew asleep inside, while Harris met with battalion command. The ground shook like the earth itself was vomiting fire. Shells fell without warning. No whistles, no time to pray. Just thunder. The crew scrambled to life, engines roaring. Echo 7 jolted forward, trying to find cover as buildings around them collapsed like paper. Inside the tank, Joe reached for the mirror, his guide, his extra set of eyes, and felt it snap in his hand, shattered. A web of broken light. He stared at it, heart sinking in a way he couldn't explain. It was just glass, but it had become part of him, of them. That stupid, cracked mirror had saved their lives more times than bullets had threatened to end them. Donnie looked over and saw the pieces. Bad luck, huh? Joe didn't laugh, because he felt it. A storm coming. By morning, they were reassigned again. The 9th Panzer Division was reported to be retreating, but with teeth. Tank-to-tank ambushes were being set on roads leading toward Cologne. The Allies wanted a spearhead force to chase them, pin them, bleed them dry. Echo 7 was chosen to lead again. But this time, Joe wasn't ready. He taped up the shattered mirror anyway, piecing it together like a battlefield surgeon. The reflection was warped now, bent, jagged. Faces looked stretched. Movements came with double images. But it was better than nothing, or so he thought. They hit the ambush 12 kilometers east of Elsdorf. German tanks weren't retreating. They were waiting. The first shot hit the tank behind Echo 7. Flames swallowed it whole. A second round screamed past their turret, missing by inches. The Germans had set up on a hill, using downed trees and blown rail cars as camouflage. Harris shouted orders, "Move left, flank wide." But before they could turn, a mine exploded under their right track. Echo 7 was stuck. Inside, chaos. Donnie swore, trying to move the turret manually. "Where are they?" he screamed. Joe was already trying to see through the mirror, but the cracks twisted everything. He turned it, adjusted it, tilted it, but it showed ghosts, smoke, nonsense. Nothing made sense anymore. Then, a flicker, a shape on the left. "Panther! Left ridge!" Joe called, even though he wasn't sure. The mirror showed a blur, like a shadow behind shattered glass. Harris made the call. "Turn left! Fire!" They did. The shells screamed across the field, hitting nothing. Seconds later, a real Panther opened fire from the right. The blast rocked the Sherman. The side armor buckled. Something inside cracked. Metal, bone, or both. Joe was thrown against the wall. Blood filled his mouth. They'd fallen for it. The mirror had lied. Smoke filled the turret. Donnie was yelling. Harris was slumped in his seat. Joe blinked through the pane, his ears ringing like church bells gone mad. The only thing he could see was the mirror. Cracked, dirty, useless, and in it, his own reflection. Not a hero, not a miracle loader. Just a scared kid with bleeding fingers and dust in his lungs. But even in that broken reflection, something moved. A shadow. Closer. Another tank. They were coming to finish them. Joe didn't think. He loaded the last shell, hand shaking. "Donnie! One more!" Donnie didn't ask where. He didn't need to. They fired blind. The explosion was so close, it felt like the world ripped apart. Then silence. They woke up hours later, pulled from the wreck by medics and engineers. Echo 7 was totaled. Harris was alive, barely. Donnie had cracked ribs. Joe's right hand was burnt and wrapped in bandages. The first thing he asked when he opened his eyes was, "The mirror." The medic frowned. "Mirror?" Joe nodded. "Yeah, just a small one. Should have been near my seat. They never found it." Weeks passed. Echo 7 never fought again, but its story spread like fire through the armor corps. A mirror. A crew. A tank that killed Panthers like it was made for it. Joe was offered a trip home. A medal. A write-up in a New York newspaper. He refused it all. Instead, he asked for a transfer to another tank, another crew, another fight. Because war wasn't won by medals, or stories, or glass. It was won by those who saw what others didn't, even if what they saw was broken. The new tank wasn't Echo 7. It didn't feel like it. It didn't sound like it. It didn't even smell like it. Fresh paint, fresh crew, and a brand new .76mm Sherman that still had that factory shine. But none of that mattered to Joe. He wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for revenge. They gave him command of the gun this time. Not just loading. Not anymore. After what he'd done, after what he survived, the brass figured he'd earned a seat behind the trigger. It wasn't a promotion. It was a test. A gamble. The new crew? Young. Eager. Too eager. Private Lenny Sharp, the new loader, barely 19, with hands that shook when he handled shells. The driver, Gilroy, a cocky Texan who kept talking about going home and opening a bar. The tank commander, Sergeant Voss, was steady, but he didn't trust Joe. "You're the mirror guy, huh?" Voss asked on the first day. Not a question. More like an accusation. Joe just nodded. "Used to be," Voss frowned. "Well, we're not using mirrors in my tank." Joe didn't argue. He didn't tell them that he already had another one in his duffel bag, stolen from a bombed-out house outside Eschweiler. A small, square mirror with a chip in the corner. Not as cracked as the old one, but it had the same weight, the same feel. And Joe wasn't about to walk into another fight blind. Their mission came quick. Push through Bergheim. Take out any German armor retreating from Cologne. Intelligence said the resistance would be light. It wasn't. The Germans were desperate. And desperate Germans were the worst kind. 2 days into the advance, the column was cut off in a forest near the Erft River. The path ahead was blocked by tank traps. The path behind had mines. It was a kill box, and the enemy was waiting. The first shell came out of nowhere and took out the lead tank. The forest came alive with machine gun fire, shouts, explosions. Voss shouted orders. Gilroy swerved into cover. Lenny fumbled with a shell. Joe sat silent for a second, staring into the new mirror, hand tight on the cannon lever. Then he saw it. A shimmer of movement. A glint through the branches. Tank barrel. 10 o'clock. Low angle. German camo netting flickering in the wind. "Panzer! Left!" Joe snapped. Voss barked. "You sure?" No. Joe aimed anyway. The shell flew. Direct hit. The German tank lit up like dry leaves. Voss stared at him. Joe didn't blink. They fought like demons in that forest. Joe didn't speak unless it was life or death. Every kill came from instinct, sharpened by reflection. His mirror was taped back into place, angled just like before. He never mentioned it, never explained. But slowly, silently, the crew started trusting him. Then something weird happened. Lenny found a mirror of his own, a small piece of car glass, bent and dirty. "Don't laugh," he told Joe one night. "I just figured. Maybe it helps." Joe didn't laugh. The next morning, Gilroy taped a piece of mirror to his driving hatch. By the end of the week, the whole damn crew had one. They weren't Echo 7, but something strange happened out there in those woods, in the wreckage, in the fog. They moved like one body. No wasted words, no hesitation. Joe would spot something in his mirror before it happened, and Lenny would already be handing him the right shell. Gilroy would turn the tank without being told. Voss stopped asking, how? Joe saw what he saw. He just started saying, where next? The Germans started calling them the Silver Eyes. Stories spread. A Sherman crew that couldn't be flanked, couldn't be ambushed, couldn't be caught. Joe still didn't believe in luck, but he believed in reflection, not just glass, self. You looked into the mirror long enough in this war, and eventually you saw what kind of man you really were. Killer, survivor, ghost. Whatever Joe saw in his reflection, he never told, but he kept that mirror polished, even on days when the tank was covered in blood and ash, even when they rolled into Cologne and saw the city burning, even when he passed by Echo 7, now gutted, rusting, forgotten on the side of the road. He paused that day, standing beside the corpse of his old tank. He reached out, touched the hatch, and whispered something no one else heard. Then he looked at his reflection in the turret of his new tank, dented, smeared with oil, and saw a man who'd lived too long to pretend anything was ever just a trick. And somewhere in that war, as tanks rolled on and men kept dying, a rumor grew stronger that the real weapon in Joe's crew wasn't the cannon or the tank or even the men inside it. It was the mirror. That stupid little mirror. Spring came late that year, cold, muddy, and quiet in the wrong kind of way. By mid-March, the Allies were across the Rhine, and the Germans were running out of ground. Towns fell in days. Resistance was scattered, desperate. But that didn't make it safe. Desperate men don't fight to win. They fight to die right. Joe's crew, now known across 2 battalions as Ghost Eyes, was deep into German territory, clearing roadblocks near a town called Hamelin. What should have been a simple sweep turned into something far worse. They didn't see it coming. Because this time, the Germans learned. The morning started normal, meaning half the crew was soaked, starving, and half sure they were about to drive into an ambush. Joe stared into the mirror like always, not blinking much. Every tree, every rooftop, every piece of stillness was suspect. The town was empty. Too empty. No civilians, Voss muttered. Not even kids, Gilroy snorted. Maybe they heard the Ghost Eyes were coming. They turned onto a narrow street, flanked by tall stone buildings. The Sherman rumbled forward, treads chewing up cobblestone. Joe didn't see anything in the mirror. And that was the first sign something was wrong. Because it wasn't quiet. It was controlled, like something was waiting. Then they heard it, a sound like a cough. Not a gun, not a tank, something mechanical. Joe leaned in. The mirror showed movement on the 3rd floor of a building to their right. Not a rifle, not a grenade, a reflection of another mirror. For a split second, he saw himself. Not from his mirror, from theirs. Reverse, Joe shouted. They've got a mirror, too. The realization hit like a gut punch. The Germans were copying the trick. Too late. A Panzerfaust, shoulder-fired, armor-piercing, came screaming out from the upper floor. The shot hit them just above the track. Echoed like a lightning bolt inside a cave. Lenny screamed. Gilroy shouted something, and the tank jerked hard left, wheels grinding. Smoke poured in. Metal groaned. Joe hit the side of the turret, hard. He couldn't hear. Everything was muffled, distant, like drowning inside a church bell. The smell of blood was instant. Voss was down, shrapnel through the throat. No last words, just wet, rattling breath. And then, nothing. Joe blinked through the smoke, dragging himself to the loader's seat. Lenny was alive but frozen, shaking like a leaf in a storm. "They used a mirror," Joe coughed. "They saw us first." Outside, German voices yelled, "Close." Joe reached for a shell. His hand was numb. He loaded anyway. "Donnie's gone," Lenny muttered. "He's not answering." "Then shut up and move," Joe snapped. "We're not dying here." He aimed through the gun sight, breathing shallow. The building with the shooter, 3 stories up. Someone was loading another Panzerfaust. No time to adjust. No time to think. Joe fired. The shell ripped through the building. Brick, glass, and bodies rained down. The mirror, their mirror, spun through the air and shattered on the street like a cursed jewel. Joe coughed, wiped blood from his eyes, and whispered, "That's our trick." It took 3 hours for the medics and recovery crew to reach them. Gilroy was unconscious but alive. Lenny refused to speak, just stared at his hands like he didn't know what they were anymore. Joe didn't talk much either. He just pulled the broken German mirror from the rubble and held it in his lap the whole ride back. Cracked. Just like his. That night, Joe sat on the edge of a muddy foxhole staring at both mirrors. His, theirs. 2 reflections. 2 ghosts. He didn't feel like a legend anymore. He felt like a man who had taught the devil a trick. And now the devil was using it too. A major visited them the next morning, congratulated them, called them heroes. Joe didn't respond. Before the major left, he said, "Bennett, Intel says there are units experimenting with full periscope mirrors now. You started something?" Joe looked up, tired. "Yeah," he said. "I started a mirror war. And from that day on, no tank crew, not Allied, not German, ever felt safe again, because everyone had mirrors now. But only one man understood what they really showed. Not the enemy, not the angles, but who you become when you watch death long enough to see your own face in it." By April, the war was nearly over, but death didn't care about calendars. The Wehrmacht was collapsing, cities falling like dominoes, and German soldiers were surrendering in droves. But not all of them. Some refused. Some vanished into the forests, into the shadows, into the last pockets of resistance, where surrender meant shame, and shame meant nothing when you were already dead inside. Joe's crew, what was left of it, had orders to clear one of those pockets. A town named Wilfingen. Small, remote, undefended. They said. They were wrong. Joe didn't say much anymore. His voice had taken on the slow, hard tone of someone who'd stopped pretending things would ever go back to normal. Lenny barely spoke at all. Gilroy still joked. But now it was quieter. The kind of jokes you say to keep yourself from crying. Their new commander was Lieutenant Kane. Green, fresh from England, full of academy pride and bad ideas. On their way to Wolfingen, Kane asked Joe, "Is it true? You were the one with the mirror?" Joe didn't answer, just stared at the road. Kane kept going. "I read about you in a field report. Said you saw things before they happened. Is it instinct or training?" Joe finally looked at him. "It's loss." Kane shut up. They rolled into Wolfingen under low cloud cover. The town looked abandoned, like a film set after the actors left. Shutters banging in the wind, flower pots broken, a church steeple leaning like it wanted to fall. But Joe felt it. That stillness again. Not the kind that comes after peace. The kind that comes before an ambush. He checked the mirror, the same one he'd used for weeks now, even though the crack had grown across the middle like a scar. He adjusted it slightly, watching for flickers, and then he saw it. Not a person, not a gun, a pattern. The same curtain drawn halfway in 4 windows. Same dark shape in each room. Too precise, too still. "They're inside the houses," Joe whispered. Everyone, Kane scoffed. You're guessing? Joe didn't blink. No, I'm seeing. Before Kane could argue, gunfire erupted from the buildings on both sides. Machine guns, grenades. Shermans ahead of them were torn apart in seconds. Joe didn't wait. Lenny, he rounds now. Lenny moved like a machine. No hesitation, not anymore. Joe rotated the turret to the first house and fired. The explosion sent bricks and bodies flying. Gilroy reversed hard, nearly tipping the tank, as Joe fired again. Third window. Fire again! Kane shouted from the command hatch, trying to take control. Joe ignored him. He was watching the mirror. There, in the reflection, a muzzle flash behind them. Rear alley, hidden position. Joe grabbed the intercom. Gilroy, spin us around, now! Gilroy obeyed instantly. A Panzerfaust hit where their engine would have been. The blast shook the tank but missed its kill. Joe took aim, fired. Another house gone. The ambush collapsed. Within minutes, infantry swarmed in behind them, cleaning up the remaining Germans. Joe's crew stayed in place, breathing hard, black smoke rising from every corner of the town. Kane looked down at him, stunned. How the hell did you know where to look? Joe didn't answer. He just tilted the mirror. In the reflection, Kane could see himself, and behind him, the church steeple beginning to sway. The artillery strikes had weakened it. Joe grabbed Kane's vest and yanked him down just as the steeple cracked and collapsed, crashing down on the street behind them with a sound like judgment. Dust and rubble everywhere. Still think it's guessing? Joe said, voice cold. That night, they camped outside what was left of Wilfingen. Fires burned quietly. No one celebrated. Not anymore. Joe sat by the tank, polishing the mirror with a piece of cloth like it was a weapon. Kane approached, sat beside him awkwardly. I don't get it, Kane admitted. It's just a mirror. No, Joe replied. It's a habit, Kane frowned. What kind of habit? Joe looked him dead in the eye, seeing the worst. Before it shows up. The war ended weeks later. Victory was declared. Flags went up. Photographers took pictures. Speeches were made. Joe was offered a medal. He didn't attend the ceremony. He left Europe in silence. No parade. No welcome home. He brought nothing back with him except a folded uniform, a piece of shrapnel in his leg, and a broken blackened mirror in his coat pocket. Years later, when people asked him what it was like to be in the war, to kill tanks, to be the man who saw death before it came, Joe never talked about the medals, the bodies, or the gunfire. He just said, sometimes the smartest thing I ever did in that war was tape a mirror to a wall and watch. And when people laughed, called it a stupid trick, he smiled. Because they didn't know. They never would. That in a world built on destruction, a stupid little mirror saved more lives than anyone would ever bother to count.